Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is Congressman Mike Levin. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Brittany. Always good to be with you.
I appreciate you coming on today because really busy day. After the clock struck midnight, the government officially shut down after a funding bill failed to pass in the Senate. And I want to talk about the blame game that's going on here because Republicans are blaming Democrats, saying they are essentially holding the government hostage over a continuing resolution that they voted before in the past. Almost all Democrats in the House and Senate voted against the CR that would keep the lights on in the government, but Democrats are pointing the finger at Republicans, saying that the right is refusing to negotiate when it comes to health care. I'm curious right now, where is your head at? Who do you think owns the shutdown?
Well, look, we're ready to negotiate right now, but House Republicans aren't even here. They're literally not in the building, and they haven't been all week. And I honestly do not understand that decision by Speaker Johnson to keep his members away from Washington, D.C. It simply makes no sense. You know, we all knew that the shutdown was near. We knew that the Senate could, at the 11th hour, negotiate, and I think it was the right and responsible thing for us as members of the House to be here physically present, ready to negotiate in good faith. When you have Republicans that control the House, Republicans that control the Senate, and Donald Trump in the Oval Office, I think it's hard to say anything other than, you know, the ball is in their court. They have the opportunity to negotiate or not negotiate. And look, healthcare for millions of Americans is worth the fight. And I think all we're saying is an incredibly reasonable topic of protecting the ACA for millions and millions of people who will be priced out of the market and won't have health insurance at all if the tax credits are allowed to expire at the end of the year. For me, that's what this has been about for some time. And as you know, Brittany, as an appropriator in the House, I'm very adamant that Congress needs to step up and protect its power of the purse. That's something that's also very, very important. But honestly, it's been a little bit surreal. And of course, Leader Jeffries went in with Schumer and Thune and Johnson on Monday afternoon. I was encouraged to see that meeting after it had been canceled previously by the president, because the president himself said that, ultimately the pressure's on the president to get everybody in the room and to try to make a deal. And our readout of that meeting, Brittany, was that the president was mostly in listening mode. On Monday afternoon, he didn't really bring any constructive, substantive proposals to the table. And then, Leader Jeffries came back and he briefed us that evening, only then for a couple hours later for the president to put out a really, frankly, mean-spirited and childish series of posts on social media, which further divided people here and made it even less likely that there'd be any sort of negotiation on Tuesday. So, look, I think we need leadership in this moment. I certainly don't think the president is exhibiting that. I don't think the Speaker of the House is exhibiting that by not even having his members present here in the Capitol to even have a discussion.
I think House Republicans would argue, they would say, hey, we voted on this CR. It is a clean bill. We aren't jamming GOP policies on it. Now Democrats are trying to jam their policies, their healthcare reforms on this. Healthcare is an important issue. We want to talk about this. I mean, maybe they would say that part, but we should talk about this. It can't get fixed overnight. What would you say to that? Do you think that there is a world in which a clean CR could potentially soon pass and then these negotiations could continue?
Well, I take exception with the clean CR frame for all of this, because a clean CR would have maintained the spending levels that were agreed upon by then Speaker McCarthy and Nancy Pelosi, Kevin McCarthy, Mitch McConnell, and Chuck Schumer. Actually, two years ago, they agreed to a 2-year deal, and then in March of this year, Republicans reneged on the terms of that deal with the CR back in March that I didn't vote for at that time. Ultimately, Schumer and the Democrats in the Senate agreed to it. But a clean CR would adhere to the levels in December of last year, not March of this year. That's number one. And number two is there's a massive factor, which is in the summer, the Republicans passed their reconciliation bill they call the Big Beautiful Bill. We can dispute the characterization of its beauty, but what's not in dispute is that they did not, as part of that, extend the ACA policies to keep millions and millions of people on health care. And it has real world impacts. We're not, it's very easy to just point fingers or cast blame. But the reality is that healthcare premiums for those on the ACA are going to more than double. There was just and hopefully you can see this, Brittany, but there was a study yesterday by the Kaiser Family Foundation, nonpartisan study. People that were paying $888 a year on average are now going to have to pay over $1,900 a year for their premiums. If you're a couple making 85 grand and you're 60 years of age, your premiums will go up $22,600, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation. So what it will mean, again, is that millions of people, including hundreds of thousands of Californians, are going to be priced out of health insurance. And what that will do is it will raise premiums across the board. In terms of there being more time, well, we've had months now. This has been an issue that should have been sorted out back in the summer. It wasn't. We've been talking about this for months. And frankly, I haven't seen any movement in August, September, now into October on it. People are getting their notices now. The actual letters in the mail saying your premiums are going to go up. Again, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, on average of 114% increase in premiums. Those letters are going out now. This needs to be addressed and dealt with now, not in November, not in December, now. And I truly do believe that in my gut that the American people agree with this. They know that healthcare for millions of Americans really is on the line here. And I am willing to fight for healthcare for my constituents. I think it's the least that any member of Congress can do when they represent hundreds of thousands of people to make sure that their constituents will not lose healthcare. The last thing I'll mention on this, there's been a lot of bad faith discussion around or claim around undocumented immigrants being the beneficiary. That's what the president seems to be alluding to in every opportunity. It is cut and dried, absolute law, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, that undocumented immigrants cannot receive care under the Affordable Care Act, cannot receive federal dollars under the Affordable Care Act. Couldn't yesterday, can't today, won't be able to tomorrow. This whole thing is a red herring to distract from the truth of the situation, which is that the administration has decided to prioritize a massive tax cut that disproportionately benefits the very wealthiest Americans at the expense of health care for millions of Americans. Those are the facts. That is irrefutable, irrefutable. Brittany, I will offer to debate any of my colleagues, House and Senate, on your show anytime to discuss this.
And I would certainly love to set that up. I do want to talk about healthcare because I know how important it is. It transcends party lines. But a New York Times poll recently showed that 2% of people think that this is the most important problem facing our country. There's over 10 issues that top it. The top issue being the economy, which we've seen now for years. And I know you're saying that healthcare is worth this fight. Once again, I'm not saying healthcare is not a serious issue here that affects both parties, but do you think the hundreds of thousands of government workers who are furloughed, who are going without a paycheck while the government shut down, do you think that they would agree with you here?
Well, look, first of all, I'd have to see the specific wording of that polling because I think that the biggest issue that I see are the cost of living is too high. And when you unpack that, the cost of healthcare is one of the highest priority items along with housing and groceries. That's number one. Number two is nobody wants to see a shutdown. At least I don't want to see a shutdown. But I also don't want to see this budget director, Russ Vought, use it as an excuse to execute his Project 2025 agenda. What he actually wants to do is far worse than what you just said, Brittany. He wants to use this to have a widespread reduction in force. He wants mass firings of federal employees. And I can tell you it is illegal. It is unconstitutional. There have already been lawsuits filed. I believe it will that it will be enjoined in the courts. And eventually this could make it all the way to the Supreme Court. The law is very clear on this. When the government shuts down, workers are declared either essential or non-essential and are either furloughed or they have to work without pay. As soon as the government reopens, people are back on the job and they get their back pay. If Vogt tries to fire people, there are policies, there are laws in place protecting civil servants. You have to have a notice period, for example. You have to give preference to veterans. There are all sorts of rules around this. You can't just go arbitrarily fire a bunch of people. So I don't take his threats or his intimidation as anything other than bullying and trying to use fear to try to get an outcome. I haven't seen anything from this administration other than misrepresenting the facts on the ground, distorting the truth, using mean-spirited and childish social media, or using bullying and intimidation. None of that, Brittany, is leadership. None of that helps anybody. None of that brings the country together. None of that solves any of the problems that Americans are facing. None of that provides health care to a single solitary American. All of it is designed as distraction, and I hope that enough people are paying attention where they don't fall for it.
Let's talk about leadership then with the Democrats, because Republicans are calling this the Schumer shutdown. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, if we remember back in March, he had a 180. In the 11th hour, he ended up supporting the continuing resolution to avert a government shutdown. And many Democrats, especially Democrats in the House, felt that this reversal at the time was a betrayal. But this is how he defended it. He said this back in March: "I believe it is my job to make the best choice for the country to minimize the harms to the American people." And he also said this: "As bad as passing the CR is, allowing Donald Trump to take even much more power via a government shutdown is a far worse option." What changed now? Because he said, "I voted for that to keep the government open so President Trump wouldn't have less guardrails if there was a shutdown." Now it's switched. I mean, what do you make of that statement then and now? What's changed?
I think there's a couple of huge things that have changed, Brittany. One is this summer's big, beautiful, big, ugly bill, whatever you want to call it, and what it did to the health care for millions and millions of Americans that people rely on. And it's been gutted in a way that we never could have fully expected. And it's not just the Affordable Care Act. We're talking a lot about the Affordable Care Act because those policies need to be fixed this year. Otherwise, people on the ACA will lose care, will be priced out of care. But it's also Medicaid and it's Medicare. Not often discussed is by adding an additional $3 trillion in debt, the big ugly bill, big beautiful bill, whatever you'd like to say, that requires now, through a process called sequestration, a cut of $500 billion to Medicare, unless that is addressed. With Medicaid, we know that there's hundreds of billions of dollars that has been cut. And again, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, a nonpartisan analysis suggests 92% of the people who will lose their care because of the Republican bill are people who are legally eligible to get that care, but do not fill the paperwork out correctly. So these are not people who are, somehow not meeting the requirements of the program. So look, it's a massive transfer of wealth that is being attempted by this administration from people who really need help, people who need basic health care, people who need to put food on the table. These are folks who are in many cases who are working incredibly hard, working multiple jobs, cannot make ends meet because all the other costs are too high. And transferring from them to the very wealthiest in our society at an unprecedented scale. And this fight starts with the Affordable Care Act and making sure that millions of people are not priced out of health care next year. But it doesn't end there. It ends when we restore the health care to the American people. And look, it's very simple. You either believe that all Americans ought to have quality and affordable health care, or you don't. And it seems as though a lot of my Republican colleagues simply don't care.
In the past couple of years that I've been hosting this show, I feel lucky that I've got to talk to Republicans and Democrats and get their perspective on issues. And usually I can find glimmers of bipartisanship or where people agree. This is the first time, I think, the first issue where it doesn't seem like there is any room for agreement. I mean, there are people that are entrenched.
Well, yeah, I actually think... No, go ahead.
Republicans blaming Democrats, Democrats blaming Republicans. There's really no area of agreement here. I know you're saying that a lot of your Republican colleagues aren't even in D.C. right now. Are the lines of communication even virtually open? I mean, what does that look like?
They're definitely open virtually for the members across the aisle that I know and respect, and there are a lot of them that I try to work with, in any event. What I will tell you, though, is there actually are areas of common ground here. So Republican Jen Kiggins, for example, from Virginia, introduced legislation that would extend the ACA credits that we're talking about and prevent millions of people from losing their care. There are other Republicans as well who agree with us on this. And behind closed doors, I know that the Republican members of the Ways and Means Committee actually talked about the importance of preventing massive increases in healthcare costs. I know behind closed doors they're thinking about it and talking about it a lot, and they understand the harm that will be done to their districts, to their constituents, because of these cuts to ACA and Medicaid and Medicare. So what has happened, though, Brittany, and you and I have spoken about this before, is two things. Number one, you have a president who uses fear, intimidation, and bullying and threatens frequently to primary his House Republican members with someone who is more MAGA. In other words, if any of them get out of line, then they're going to face a Republican primary from the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. Number two, compounding this, is that Mike Johnson is probably the weakest speaker in the history of the House of Representatives, at least the modern history. I haven't researched all the way back to the 1800s, but what I see now, let's remember what happened. Kevin McCarthy did a deal a couple years ago to have a 2-year funding plan, reduces the deficit, continues baseline funding for discretionary, non-discretionary, defense, etc. And for that, what was his reward? He got booted. He got thrown out. And so Mike Johnson comes in, not as the first choice, not as the second, not as the third, but as the fourth choice after Scalise, Jordan, and Emmer couldn't get the votes to be Speaker. What is Johnson's great superpower? Survival. For him, even if, let's say, half or more of the Republicans agree with us on extending the ACA credits, which I actually think a huge number of them do, Johnson could bring a bill, could include that in a CR tomorrow if he wanted to. It would pass with flying colors in the House. You'd get north of 300 to 350 votes for that. Why doesn't he do it? Because of those extremists on the far right, those same people who threw McCarthy out for doing a deal then would throw Johnson out for doing a deal today. That's what this is really all about. Mike Johnson knows this is a reasonable policy. Mike Johnson knows that we're not trying to provide health care to millions of undocumented people. He knows it's a lie. He knows the president's off base. He's afraid of the president, and he's more interested in staying the Speaker of the House than showing even a little bit of courage, knowing the consequences, knowing millions will lose their health insurance. It's unconscionable to me, Brittany.
When I'm thinking about leadership, and I too am a student of very modern history, I'm looking at Kevin McCarthy. I'm thinking about perhaps how Speaker Johnson is looking at what happened to Kevin McCarthy. I'm also remembering the blowback that Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer got back in March when he switched and ended up voting for the continuing resolution. And he had to really essentially do an apology tour. I mean, Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries at the time couldn't even, defend Schumer's decision to vote at the time. Do you think there's an element on both sides here that is personal, and that's why both sides are so entrenched here, especially when you're looking at leadership and what's happened in the past couple of years?
Well, going back to March again, I think there's another key difference that I did not explain, in addition to the healthcare situation in the middle, which is the timing of it. So, as I recall, last time in March, we were not anticipating that the Republicans would be able to pass a CR on a party line vote. That had not been done before. Usually, it is a broad bipartisan group that passes a CR. But because that March CR was not a clean CR, it was not in accordance with the December numbers, as I said, and it had extraneous priorities of this administration. So we would not support it as the House Democrats, but we did not anticipate, we meaning Democrats at large, Chuck Schumer, et cetera, I don't think anticipated that it would pass on a party line vote. And as I recall, it was just a day or two later that the Senate had to take it up. So Schumer had to make a very fast decision. I disagreed at the time with that decision. I was very vocal about it, went on plenty of TV and said that I disagreed with it, that I felt that we should have stood and fought then against the recklessness and lawlessness of Doge at the time, and the havoc that Doge was wreaking on the federal government. But what's done is done. What I know today to be the facts are that Chuck Schumer is fighting for the health and well-being of the American people. We are communicating in a way that House and Senate Democrats don't have a whole lot of daylight between us right now, and I'm encouraged by that. And I also see Mike Johnson refusing in any way to stand up for anything that isn't in exact alignment with what Donald Trump wants. And the last I checked, Article 1 of the Constitution gives Congress the power of the purse, not the President of the United States. The Anti-Deficiency Act says that Congress determines what to spend and not spend on, not the president spending unilaterally without the consent of Congress. So we have an out-of-control budget director, we have an out-of-control administration, and we have a Speaker of the House refusing to stand up to them in any way and afraid to even have an honest discussion, which is why I think one of the reasons he prevented his members from coming here this week, because there are a lot of difficult questions that I don't think they're going to be able to answer.
I'm curious where we go from here, because a government shutdown affects everybody, whether you're directly not getting a paycheck. I'm even thinking next week, and this is so a non-issue, I'm going on a flight. Will TSA, will getting onto the plane, will that be an issue? But it affects everybody, and I'm curious, how long do you think this is going to last? I'm optimistic that you're saying that there are conversations, perhaps quietly, between Republicans and Democrats in the House, but is this going to drag on for just a few days? Will it go even longer? I remember in the Trump administration, the first one, that saw the longest government shutdown with 35 days. I mean, where do we go from here? How long can we expect this to last?
It's ultimately up to the President of the United States, Brittany, because all those years ago when he was Citizen Trump, he said back then in 2013, it's up to the president. The pressure's on the president to bring the people into the room and to make the deal. And he also said back then, and I'm paraphrasing, that, in the future, nobody's going to remember what the Congress did. They're going to remember what the president did. And Donald Trump was right about all of that back then. What he's doing now is, I give him credit for at least bringing the people into the room, begrudgingly, after rescheduling the meeting. But in terms of leadership, all I've seen from him since is childish, mean-spirited tweets, blatant mischaracterizations, shifting blame, just making stuff up. And I think that this will end when the President of the United States actually wants to negotiate, when he actually wants to show that he can make a deal. Because look, we want a deal. We're not talking about anything unreasonable. We're talking about protecting the health care of millions of Americans. We're talking about American citizens. Next year, they're going to lose their health care because they can't afford it anymore. And then millions more, they're going to have to decide between whether they have health care or enough to eat, or health care and their rent. This is not like theoretical. This isn't some game. This is going to hurt millions and millions of people. Republicans in the red states, Democrats in the blue states, everybody needs health care. So it's going to end when Donald Trump wants it to end.
How hard of ball, and I'll leave with this question, how hard of ball are Democrats playing here? Is there a world in which the government reopens, the shutdown ends, without any type of health care reform concession from Republicans?
Well, I sure hope not. I am not a member of the United States Senate. Of course, in the Senate, the threshold is 60 votes. There are 53 Republicans. We saw Rand Paul side with the Democrats yesterday, and we saw three of the Democrats side with the Republicans. So I think it was 55-45. So I'm not there in the room, but I can tell you that my two senators, Adam Schiff and Alex Padilla, I've been in touch with both of them, and they're standing strong. And I've encouraged them to, make sure that they have those conversations with their colleagues so that Senate Democrats stand strong. I think in this moment, the health care of millions of Americans is worth the fight. And that's a fight I'll have until, we have a resolution that protects the health and well-being of all those people who are going to be priced out of the market next year.
Congressman, there's certainly a lot to look out for in the upcoming hours, let alone days, perhaps weeks, until there's a resolution here. And I hope you can come back on and break it down with me when we see developments. And thank you again so much for the conversation. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you, Brittany. It's always good to be with you, and I'll look forward to being on whenever I can. Thank you so much.